afternoon. This is the event for this semester's Visiting Writers Reading Series. I'm Dr. Bird. I guess I don't know the students here, so I'm Dr. Brigitte Bird. And obviously I'm coordinating the Visiting Writers Reading Series, which is sponsored by the College of Arts and Sciences and the English department. So we invite writers to come, and we try to get a few books so that we can distribute them to our students for free. Usually our authors and guests are very generous, and they accept to do that as part, taken away from their fees. And today our guest is a poet. Her name is Carrie Bennett, and I'll read you a little bit of an introduction. But I have known Carrie Bennett for a long time. In fact, we went to graduate school together. I was working on my PhD. She was working on her master's then, and she was a baby, really, and I was obviously older, but that was a while back, 18, something like that, years ago. And we became really close friends. Of course, she went to Boston, and I came here because, that's life, right? I'm happy to have her come and visit us this semester so we can catch up a little bit. So Carrie Bennett is the author of Biography of Water, which is the winner of the 2004 Washington Prize, and several chapbooks from Dancing Girl Press. The Quiet Winter, Animals in Pretty Cages, and the Afair Fragments, and Expedition Notes, an ephemera book from Letter Press. She holds an MFA in poetry from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and is a Massachusetts, hard for me to say considering I'm from France, too many S's there. I'll try again. Massachusetts Cultural Council Artist Fellow, and teaches writing at Boston University. And so today she's promoting this book here, which is The Land is a Painted Thing. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, we usually, and maybe your creative writing professor tells you that, but since we were in graduate school together, we've become readers of each other's work. So she always reads my work, I always read her work, and we provide each other's feedback. So it's like for 18 years that has been going on. So anyway, welcome, Carrie.
Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here. This is a great turnout, so that's awesome to see. I'm going to start by reading some poems from my newest book, The Land is a Painted Thing. I started writing these poems over 10 years ago when I was I moved to Virginia to live with my parents for a year after I lived in Iowa, and I was teaching high school in Charles City, Virginia, and every morning I got to have this really beautiful 30-minute drive through the countryside. And so the backdrop of that drive, the factories and the rivers and the farmland really became the setting for this book. It's a little bit different than maybe a traditional book of poetry. They're all prose poems, which means I wasn't really working with form, and I tried to create a fragmented narrative that you could kind of follow from the beginning to the end, where I have a set of characters, the location, the setting, and there's sort of a dramatic arc from beginning to end. So what I'll try and do is to show you what I was working with in that narrative, and I'll read some excerpts from each section and maybe give you a chance to see the story that sort of surfaces with these individuals. I love science fiction, so it's a little bit science fiction-y. You'll notice that pretty quickly. It's definitely not like within our world. So I'll read the epigraphs to the book itself. They're these quotations that I include to sort of establish the tone of the book. So the first one is, "What are my eyes for if they can see but see nothing?" Jenny Erpenbeck, The Book of Words. "And what will come has already come." William Kentridge, The Refusal of Time. And so this is the very first poem in the book. It's called Transplant Factory. "We filed into the room. We positioned ourselves along the white walls. Our mouths were closed and waiting. The room was surrounded with shuffling feet and sighs. Someone covered her face with her hands. Near the ceiling, rows of fluorescent bulbs shone starkly. Loudspeakers hung in each corner. 'Stand still,' said a voice we had never heard. Someone coughed quietly. Someone began to cry soundlessly. 'You no longer know your own names,' the voice told us. 'Watch how your bodies refuse submission.' Time became a pile of snow. Static filled the room like cataract stars. At that moment, I looked out the window and the sky unburdened itself and forgot it ever knew light." And I won't say too much in between, again, just so I'll kind of read through all of the poems. So please remain silent. In anticipation of the daily meetings, I scrubbed my eyes. Other samples were to be considered: skin graft, punctured lung, beating throat. I was prepared for anything. The directions were framed and carried at all times. Each street spoke a different hum. We sat quietly waiting to be fed. We were only so many scraps, only so many holes to see through. My body was placed in a machine, pressed on. There was some comfort to that. Okay. Grief primer. We learned many words would be lost. Books, mirrors, scarves and mittens, postcards, plays, pets, hot baths, sheet music, river stones polished to a pale red, picnics with lemon cake and coffee, early morning bird calls, flashlights, photographs, record players, animals carved from birch trees, bicycles, movie theaters, red wine, crocheted blankets, carousels, houseplants and pianos. Each word we wrote on little slips of paper we hid under our tongues. Our hearts became exiles, a silence settled in. Today's lesson. I dreamed I was walking in the woods with my dog. Pine trees towered over us, scaffolding the sky in a sharp web of needles. Suddenly there was a dead owl, its body like a collapsed pillow in the snow. My dog sat next to the small body, stood guard as though the owl was only sleeping. All around us wind. Silence covered us like a heavy snowbank. Through the night, through the forgotten room, the eyes a room, a locked away word. Transplant Factory. The machines continued to move across the land like breathing oil rigs. Their digging wore down the frozen dirt to paper-thin piles. From the loudspeakers came a different voice. Tomorrow will begin a new system, the voice told us. You will decode the messages from the falling snow. Each person will wear her history on her skin. Make sure these parts of your skin remain exposed at all time. Whatever was going to happen hadn't been named yet. A new animal. We didn't know what we were doing. We were trying to make the machines more human, or we were trying to make humans more like machines. Either way, the glass fell off the table. As usual, there was a silence in the back of the room, our throats like shelves, our hands empty containers waiting to be filled. Certainly, it doesn't end this way. Each person braced for the next shock, and each shock reduced to an incident report. The machines knew to be careful this time. Our eyes offered us nothing, and in the end, that was the reason we hid them in drawers. For later, that was what we knew. Though our corners were still clean and neat, they told us the illness was now in the ground. We built signs about the division of land. Eventually, we sewed our lungs to our chests. We understood clarification was necessary. We had all the memory we could buy. We were able to see our lungs, how they caught themselves before departure, how communication was a form of wreckage. The machines felt sad, were things of land, and the messages were sent through an open throat. The milk sky held its position all day. Homeland Security 2. Be grateful for the shadow you saw yesterday. Be grateful for the walls, for the ceiling that doesn't snow, for the cold soup and stale husk of bread. Be grateful for the blindness of night, for your opaque sleep warm as pearled water. We were not safe here but couldn't leave. Oh, obvious violence, keep it to yourself. Morning calisthenics. The voice drilled over the loudspeakers. Move your mouth, smile, now smile more. I closed my eyes and our faces became seagulls. A new hunger. Another violent sunset. Suddenly thousands of seagulls swarmed the sky like an endless field of gray waves. The fading sunglow spread like wings, was molten and momentary, was the instant just before nightfall. My heart opened and closed its mouth. The stale pieces were packed like feathers in my rib cage, and the too bright tucked me into bed. Look at the inside of my mouth. There was my soul, stupid wandering wretch groping around like an animal without eyes. Passive resistance. We formed our own language, the different silences, how our mouths moved like moles above ground. Little scraps of paper meant hunger. Pieces of fabric in the corners meant warmth. A raised hand meant danger. Loneliness and desire were scratches along the walls. Friendship, a small tap on the window. The body grew another layer. What were we trying to escape now? My lungs knocked on the chest's door. Our messages were everywhere, scattered fingerprints smudged on windows. The voice told us, sit still, this world is meant to bind. Don't be difficult, your silence means nothing. Pulse and pulsing, fallen back intimacy, I've lost my human rendition. I was certain death pressed inside my stomach. The body became its own type of map. Dear little song under my wrist, that was how I loved. Of hope. But the dirty thread of yesterday pulled at our skin. Tomorrow we will tie our answers to the new wires hanging from the sky. Tell the land we pray for it every night. Tempt understanding with blindness. Tempt blindness with heat. Tempt heat with buckets of snow. Tempt snow with sky. Tempt sky with flight. Tempt flight with a colony of shining clouds. And I'll read two poems that are part of the very last section. And this book took me a really long time to write. It's actually a combination of two books. And so I really wanted to give the people in my book a way out because I put them in this really terrible situation where they don't really have much freedom. And so in the last section, they start figuring out a way to leave or escape. So this is the first poem in that last section, Transplant Factory. At night, we started creating our own breathing maps. We searched the drawers for pencils and paper, each with her little compass of hope beating away. The land outside became large rectangles of reds, rows of black lines, woven nets of blue. We made the horizon a river of yellow rope. We turned the fences into bright flags. Our maps looked like relocated skin grafts or one big quilted plot. This will be the last one I read from this book. And Survival Guide. The future became a sea exploding to red. The rugs pulled themselves away when we walked through the room. We had learned to sit with our little mouths like open cans. A fluorescent bulb fell from the ceiling, glass shattered into sharp piles of frozen brightness. Our lungs dislocated themselves. We walked up and down the halls and waited for the coral foam of light again. And so I'll just read a few poems from my newer project that's Expedition Notes. And I was in between projects and really tired of what I was writing. And so kind of tired of how I was using language. So I went to, and I love adventure tales. So I reread Richard Byrd's memoir Alone, which is about his time in Antarctica. And I decided to write some prose poems that were erasures of specific chapters. So I will read 2 of those prose poems. And so what I did was I underlined words or phrases I was really interested in that kind of like, for whatever reason, popped out at me. And then when I went to my computer, I would have those pages open and I would chronologically follow the language that I pulled from those chapters, sort of, in essence, erasing large chunks of his own writing to create my own poems. And from that process, another narrative surfaced. I'm really interested in trying to create stories in my poems, sort of larger concept projects. And so this one, I have a female explorer going out and sort of seeing, exploring after a devastation has occurred. And so this first poem that I'll read is the very first erasure prose poem I wrote based on Byrd's memoir. And so it's called Days North of Me. Star patterns tarred the sky. Before I left Fifth Avenue became a desert, wind and night and cold and to know. The work was done. I left to find the last ice age, a little America I could love. I needed more solitude to uncover the auroral work caught up in the winds. The weather became personal. Robots observed the sky coral cloud scrapers. I found machines on every island, the coast fixed like a brainstem or amphitheater to chart murder and suicide. Hemmed in on every side, my inadequacies crowded the night sky. Before me broken ice, wave upon wave of upheaval, deep crevices, pits and open. There's no life 350 fathoms down, just a hurricane-whipped sea petrified at the height of blow. Safe transit, my gaping next, my ice conditions. I charted the throwing bridge, a worst heaving ocean. The unbroken night lasted 8 months, a city or a raft, a sunless wastewater, a crash occasionally. Lost creatures ambushed my ship, groped the sides. 60 feet below me, sounds of thunder. And let's see, so this is another prose poem that I wrote using that same system. A bear can be a wolf. As if you start the charts of your own tragedy. As if my mouth was a little clear covering I was incapable. As if a well wildly filled the flashlight on my wrist. As if lantern, as if sinking seaworthiness nailed the tallest tree. As if snow, my hands drunk a number of small things. As if clocks ticked confident in escape. Winds, anchorage, quiet swing. As if stronger nourishment, a piece of chocolate, later anything twisted on the floor still warm. Write a message, little America, reasons for weak fire, unbearable breath, the lantern a ledge, the lantern a string, nail red, cracked tallow. As if anything so friendly seemed mistaken. As if sleeping pills, flashlight, cup palm, shrinking universe, as if call it God. I learned wind would mean a gallon more. I learned night meant a radio, a condition reporting. As if code would betray me. Suffer salt crackers, unspeakable night magnificent. I had light. As if these were facts. But how? You precious something by the shelf. I eavesdropped on little America, as if poor thing haunted too. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. So we usually, after reading, like to reserve some time so that you guys can ask questions to the author, because you don't meet a writer, like all the time, or maybe you don't know people are writers. I mean, you're professors in creative writing, Dr. Pfeiffer, we are writers, but someone new. So you can ask questions.
Yeah.
about the reading you just heard, or writing process, whatever question you would like to ask to Carrie. And then after that, we'll have Carrie sign the books that some of you had received, right? Okay, so go for it. Questions?
Hi.
I remember you started to say that you really do like sci-fi, so that's the genre you're into most?
I like what it's able to do where you're not so bound to reality. And sometimes I feel like when you can bring in those science fictional elements, you're able to expose larger things about society that might take longer if you're kind of anchored to the specifics of kind of depicting like a real person or a real situation. So I love science fiction. Yeah.
I was wondering what made you choose your style of writing?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I think probably a lot of my teachers really influenced me. I worked with my professors at Florida State really let me be very wild. They gave me a lot of freedom. And then when I went to Iowa, they kind of broke that down a little bit, very harshly. But I had some mentors that were also interested in this kind of book-length project where you aren't writing individual pieces, but you're trying to fit them all to create a whole reality in a book. And so I think that my mentors were really influential in getting me to think about poetry in that way. So probably that, a couple key figures. Yeah. Anything else?
Your introduction said that you were in this idyllic place in Virginia that inspired this book, and yet it's somewhat dark.
I know, that's what, yeah. When I was thinking about what to say to introduce the book, I thought, oh, I'm saying it's so beautiful, but the book itself is so dark.
Is that just your style of thinking, or
Yeah.
something dark in Virginia that
No, I was living there when I can't remember what hurricane hit, like 13 years ago. I can't remember the name, but there was a big storm that hit, and so I was helping take care of with my parents and helping take care of the yard and kind of the destruction around that. So that got me thinking about the land in a really specific way. But I have to say I'd never taught high school before, and some of the details of that, like the announcements over the loudspeakers, felt really weird to me. And so suddenly my brain went into like this sort of science fiction thing, like you have a community of people who are really controlled by like these figures that you don't always see with these announcements. And certain novels that I read, 1984, The Handmaid's Tale, they're really influential, and I feel like I learned a lot from those novels. So I think all those things kind of influenced me to write a dark book. Yeah.
You mentioned that you've gotten tired of your own, narrative voice.
Yeah.
The way you use words. Can you talk a bit more about that and what is like the biggest difference between that previous set of work that you were tired of and this new project you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it had to do with the language that I sort of naturally gravitate to using, and I was tired of, I really didn't feel like I had a story to tell. I'd spent so much time with The Land as a Painted Thing, and so I really wanted to figure out, well, and I have to say, I was also reading this really strange, very long Russian novel, and there was a section in it that there was a female archaeological student who wanted to go on this expedition, but she wasn't able to because she was a woman, and that made me think, oh, well, I could create my own expedition where the explorer was a woman and kind of add that narrative to a male-centered sort of activity to some extent. We have female explorers, but a lot of the historical well-known explorers are men, and so that got me thinking about creating my own explorer. And then I also thought it was a little subversive to then go to Birds, who's the male explorer, and kind of use his language to aid my own narrative. So there was a lot of different parts working, but it's really freeing to find new ways of expressing yourself, and it also it freed me up from not having to worry about like what I was trying to say in the poems, and sort of let it happen when, for whatever reason, I picked certain words, certain phrases, and suddenly when I was collecting them in prose poems, I thought, oh, here's this weird story I had no idea was even happening in his own language. So it was sort of an exercise that ended up being really fruitful creatively. But yeah, I get really tired of the way I think. Yeah.
You mentioned that you had a drive that kind of prompted the whole project.
Mm-hmm.
And just with your sci-fi experiences and like pieces, like,
Mm-hmm.
you draw experiences from real world.
Mm-hmm.
Or kind of,
It's like a mix of those things, right? Like I definitely, you know, it was the backdrop of my day 2 times a day, and it was this really I just love the country, and it was very meditative, and so I definitely used those details and then changed them completely for my own purposes. So I like starting with what's happening, like what I see and what I experience, and then I try and fictionalize it, separate myself a bit, so I have a bit more freedom with what I'm doing with the information or the imagery. So it's like kind of a hybrid between fiction and poetry. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned quite often in your answers things that you read.
Yeah.
So would you talk a little bit more about your relationship between reading and writing, and do you do both every day?
Yeah.
How that works?
I read every day. I'm an avid reader. I love reading. I don't get to write every day, unfortunately. It's sometimes Brigitte and I talk about this when you get in the mode of being professor and that critical brain, right? Like engaging critically, it can be really difficult to immediately like switch and shift between creative and critical. So right now I'm trying to just write some random poems like once a week. But I really try a lot of like, I also was influenced by some art exhibits I went to around Boston, and I really definitely glean a lot of inspiration from what I'm drawn to as a reader or a viewer, and think about how I could use some of the things that I like from the work that I'm reading. I had one of my poetic friends said that you know, you want to be part of the conversation that you like the most, right? And so like part of writing in this way is my attempt at being part of that conversation that I like reading and seeing. So yeah.
are all of your pieces poetry based?
I just finished one shorter project that had some dramatic elements in it, where I had dialogue and they take terms from the theater, and so I'm really interested in breaking down like the different genres and seeing what I can, like what elements I can use to benefit my own writing. Yeah. I love Claudia Rankin. She was one of my mentors at Iowa. I was super lucky to work with her, and she's just blown up in the last couple years with her book Citizen. If you have not read it, I would recommend like get it today. And she really is probably my most influential writer and thinker, and she just, yeah, she's brilliant. So she's definitely my favorite poet. Yeah. Anything else?
No question? Well, yeah, one more question.
Oh yeah.
You think you'll like steer away from like poetry in the future?
I keep trying to do that. Every time I'm done with a poetic project, I'm like, I'm gonna write a novel, and it's so hard to write a novel. And so now I was like, last summer I started working on a poetic novella, but it's like, I flatlined on that. So I keep trying. Maybe eventually I'll get to work on something that's not like this hybrid experimental thing. I would love to. Yeah.
What is your writing process like? How do you organize your ideas? Like,
Yeah.
you have to be a certain environment, certain type of
Mm-hmm.
certain
My process is like really fast in terms of writing, and then really slow in terms of figuring out how parts fit together. So it can take me years to finish a project. So that part is like a marathon for me, but I need a lot of free space. Like, it's not so much being in a certain room or having certain rituals, but I need like weeks where I don't have tons of plans, I'm not traveling. I can just sort of like, there have been articles that talk about different parts of your brain, and when you're in kind of the frontal lobe, you're thinking critically and you're focused, and to be creative, you have to free yourself from that part of your brain, and I need a lot of free time to be lazy and to like not do too much. And then I think it like unlocks some part of my brain that can be sort of weird and unexpected. So you guys should do less, I guess I'm trying to say. And then you'll be more creative. It's very counterintuitive to our culture, right? Which is like, do more, study more, go do this. But I feel like to be creative, you have to give yourself space and time.